you so much for sticking around. Did that not look amazing? So beautiful, so beautiful. Well, please welcome the writer and director of SONGCATCHER, Maggie Greenwald. Yay, Maggie. Here's a mic for you.
Snowy evening here in Nashville.
You got to say it loud. And I also want to bring up our other special guest, Langston Wilkins. Come on up, Langston. I've got an extra water for you. If you missed the beginning, Langston Wilkins is an ethnomusicologist and a traditional arts specialist for the Tennessee Arts Commission and formerly of Humanities Tennessee, and received his PhD in folklore and ethnomusicology at Indiana University. He's doing field work. I don't know if it's exactly what you would call song collecting, but it's in that vein, and he'll talk a little bit about what he's doing. But thank you both for being here so much. So Maggie, I'll start with you. I know that a producer had approached you about making a film about country music business, and that sort of led you to making SONGCATCHER. What was more interesting to you? How did that happen?
Is this on?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Okay. I was approached by Ellen Regis, the producer of this film, who has a passion for country music, and she wanted to make a film about the early days of the country music business. I have no interest at all in the country music business or the movie business or any business. But the prospect of someone who was ready to finance a film was, of course, quite enticing. So I said, well, let me go do some research and see what I can come up with. And I just started doing some research and learned that this was an incredible period up in the mountains, a very American moment of a convergence of people concerned with social justice, of people who had been in the mountains for hundreds of years and were considered savages and animals, impoverished people, and of course American capitalism, which just wanted to take it all and rape and ravage it. It just, I always love stirring up those pots. And so I brought the idea back to Ellen, and she said, wow, sure, let's go.
Yeah, that's great. So what did you learn about, and you're from New York, so what were your perceptions of the area when you went to Asheville and shot the film, and what did you learn along the way?
Well, I had fallen in love with the music before I got there. My husband, David Mansfield, who supervised all this music, had turned me on to this music when we first met, and he played Hazel Dickens for me, and Ralph Stanley, and Iris DeMent, and so I was in love with the music and a little bit familiar with it. We went on a research trip that started in Nashville, and we tracked down Sheila K. Adams, who's like an 8th generation ballad singer, who was the keeper of all things related to mountain music. And she met me outside on a rock on a college campus. I forgot the name of it. It's in a small town outside of Asheville. And we talked for a while, and then she said, well, you're a very nice person. That's where I got the line from. And she said, well, why don't you go to my cousin Jerry's store and tell Jerry I sent you and that you're a very nice lady, and he should help you. And Sheila, she opened the doors to the music that is still going on. I mean, this movie was made 20 years ago, and I'm sure nothing's changed in 20 years or 100 years. The people who still live up there, just their life's breath is making music, and all of you from Nashville know about that. So I just realized the depth of the tradition and how all-encompassing it was, and really the way it connected to to American music, combining with Black music, and that's who we are.
So, Langston, can you talk about what ethnomusicology is and what attracted you to it, and what kind of work are you doing? I'm sorry, I should talk about ethnomusicology first.
That's fine. Let's see. Well, ethnomusicology is the study of music as culture, or music in its cultural context. So instead of strictly focusing on the purely technical aspects of music, ethnomusicologists study the function of music for individuals, cultures, communities, societies, governments, various social formations. And music, performs various functions within societies, and that's what we saw in the film. We saw music as ritual, we saw music commemorating birth and death, music as history, music as traditions. So these are various things that ethnomusicologists study. We also study how music intersects with race, class, gender. We also saw those in the film. And essentially it's music as social life, and ethnomusicology is a social science, and its method is field work. And we also saw that presented in the film. So essentially, we move to a particular community, build relationships with folks, and through these relationships, we learn about their musics. So that's kind of ethnomusicology in a nutshell, I think.
How did you get interested in it?
Just as a youth, I became enamored with hip hop culture when I was a kid. A very small child. I read everything I could about it. I listened to everything I could, and I kind of wanted to know the deeper structures of the music and the culture. So that kind of sparked my interest. And when I got to grad school, all I wanted to do was investigate hip hop. And eventually I learned about ethnomusicology, and they told me I could study hip hop on a graduate level, and I just kind of dove right in. That's all I wanted to do. So it's kind of how I got into it.
And so what does that look like exactly? It's not exactly song collecting, but can you talk a little bit about what it actually looks like when you work?
Yeah. Well, when I work, in terms of my work with the Tennessee Arts Commission, it's more about music preservation, I'll say. So there's various forms of music, various styles, various genres that are kind of waning or near death here in Tennessee. So what we do with the Arts Commission through our apprenticeship program is that we find masters of these traditions. So these could be old time music or various blues forms, fife and drum. We find masters of these traditions and we pair them with younger artists who want to learn these traditions. And so through those relationships, we kind of preserve these various musical forms. So that's what I do in my job. But outside of my job, in terms of my personal work, it's again about I study how music intersects with, race and place and culture and things like that. So, there's a variety of approaches to the study of ethnomusicology. There's infinite number of approaches. So.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how to ask this question, but how gender and race sort of play into capturing culture, and I think a lot about who gets to be the authority on American history and who. I know this is
That's a big question.
Yeah, I know. I'm trying to.
But I think we all know the answer to.
Well, yes, we do. But I'm interested in as I was reading about the film and the work about how so many women were the songcatchers. And I'm thinking about cultural appropriation with Black music and rock and roll, and there's so many ways we can have this conversation.
Well, in terms of this tradition in the mountains, which did in fact come from Scotland and Ireland and was completely obsolete by 1900, and people were collecting it in those countries to preserve it as an ancient artifact. And it's the origins of storytelling in not so much music, but more significantly, it's considered the origins of storytelling, narrative in British and European tradition. So to discover when these educated women, who were the first generation of college-educated American women, first generation in the world, actually, of educated, college-educated women, and they wanted to live lives of service, and a number of them did choose to go into the mountains, which was going into a completely impoverished community of illiteracy and everything that is portrayed in the film, and to educate the people without robbing them of their culture. And so it was quite remarkable to find these songs in intact versions. And the keepers of the songs were men and women. There were no gender lines in terms of who was allowed to sing the songs, who kept the songs. It was probably more women, because the men were out working and the women would sing them to their kids and pass them down. And there's some of these songs that have 100 verses in some versions of them. They are incredible narratives. Like the one about cutting off her head and kicking it against the wall. I mean,
Yeah,
I think that one had about 100 verses or something. So these are really condensed versions of the songs. But so for these musicologists to realize that there's something significant musically happening here was reaching for something else, not just nice literary tradition, but music was by then already considered culture. So it was one of the few ways that gender lines were crossed in the community, which actually are very strict gender lines, as you know.
Yeah, thank you. Does anybody have a question in the audience? I can bring the mic out to you. Don't you have anything to add to that, Langston? Will we back your hand?
Oh, I think we got a hand.
Yeah, how much was this based on any sort of actual person? How much of this was based on a person, and how much of this was strictly out of your creation of the script?
There's a great deal of inspiration that went into the characters in the film. Lily is an invention, but her work is inspired by the work. Some of you who are interested in this music may have heard of Olive Campbell. In North Carolina, there's a folk center called the John C. Campbell Folk something or other. She was a minister's wife. They lived in the mountains. She was very, very well educated, and she was, in fact, the first person to realize, to take note of these ballads and go, wow, this is really important. And she did collect the first 10, and she brought them to her sister in Boston, and a musicologist from England named Cecil Sharp was very renowned at that time. He'd been collecting the ballads throughout the UK. And he was, I think, at Harvard or something like that. And so she managed to get the ballads to him. And he, my silly rendition of the very scholarly Cecil Sharp as the silly Cyrus Whittle, he was amazed by what she had discovered from a musicologist's perspective. It was very profound. And he said he got a grant from Harvard or wherever it was, Columbia or Harvard, to go to the mountains and collect the songs, and Olive was going to help him. But she was pregnant and couldn't go traipsing around the mountains. So he was there. He had a woman assistant whose name is, I've forgotten at this moment. Because Olive couldn't come, he said, well, I'm going to go collect them and I'm going to publish them with your name first because you made this discovery. But his assistant, who was a woman, didn't like that idea. So yes, she did. She was really bad. She took Olive's name off the manuscript. Right? What a bitch. And, right, women against women. There was no girl power then. And so You know, there was a lot of inspiration that was there that I turned into my own things, really. So it's not based on Ala at all. It's inspired by her discovery and some other things going on there.
Another question?
Yeah, first off, that was an incredible movie. Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks.
You mentioned that your husband turned you on to, was it Iris DeMent? Is that what you said? The lady's name?
My husband's a musician.
Right.
And he was very familiar with his expertise is folk music, and he, when we met 25 years ago, turned me on to the music he was interested in. So it included Hazel Dickens and Emmylou Harris and Iris DeMent, who only I think had 2 records out, and Judy Dale Gilmore, My Mind's Got a Mind of Its Own, which will stay with me forever, and just Ralph Stanley, all kinds of music. And
do you think you can retrieve any of that on YouTube?
it's probably all on YouTube.
Okay.
Just Google. It's all there.
Iris DeMent, so, yeah.
Oh, Iris has records out, and there's a SONGCATCHER CD that I hate, but it does have the Iris song on it because it doesn't have our music on it. It was inspired by the SONGCATCHER CD, but they did keep Iris's song and Emmylou's song. And that's available on Amazon.
I'd like to know how does all this play out with what John Lomax did and the Smithsonian and all of that tradition? How does I mean historically, where does John Lomax come in all of this?
John, you want to answer that question?
We didn't bring John Lomax with us.
We have John Lomax III here tonight in the audience, and happy to have him.
Well,
He would know better than me, actually.
Yeah, grandfather started collecting in the 1880s around the campfires around the Chisholm Trail in Texas, but he never published anything until 1910. And those songs, originally, he started with cowboy songs because that was where he was from. So he was doing the same thing, in essence, finding songs by quote-unquote common people. He was told by his professors at the University of Texas that that was unworthy of academic study. In his autobiography, he says he burned the manuscripts, but somehow they survived, and in 1910, his first book, Cowboy Songs and Other Frontier Ballads, was published. He went on to record 8,800 different songs, stories, and other various things for the Library of Congress. So he carried on with this same kind of work, and he was actually enabled to do this by Harvard University, where he went for graduate study and gave him a fellowship to continue. And the English ballad people of the day, Barrett Wendell, told him that this is your mission. Go find these songs and record them for posterity, which he did for the next 38 years.
I think an interesting question, which I don't know the answer to, is song collecting of the common people was going on throughout the United States and Europe at the same time. So I don't know what politically had aroused this sudden interest in arts of the common people, and maybe it was the emergence of communism, political stuff. I don't know at all what it was. But for instance, the playwright Chekhov was a music collector. He collected Russian folk songs. And was how he made a living between writing a couple of plays here and there. So it was something going on everywhere. I mean, Cecil Sharp was collecting in the UK, Chekhov was collecting in Russia. I never concerned myself with why, but that would be an interesting thing and probably not too difficult to find out. Because they all happened separately and around the same time.
Another question?
I have loved this movie for so long, and I feel like there are some actors and actresses in the movie that are significant in the history, and can you make some connections for us?
I'm not sure what you mean.
Well, like, some of those authentic looking people when they're singing, I'm like, okay, there's somebody that I should know, but I don't know who that is.
Well, I'm not sure, actually. Most of them are actors. The two that are authentic, Iris DeMent, who played Rose Gentry, is an incredible American folk singer. You know, she's a recording artist who's from Missouri and who has a voice that, for me, just, you know, it is from another world, and it wrenches my heart. And but the two who are actual mountain singers are in the scene where the song "Oh Death" is thrown from one to the other. The only two are the second voice is a man named Bobby McMillan, who is an incredible singer. He's a guy who lives in the mountains of North Carolina in a trailer. At the time we shot this, he had no running water or bathroom, but he was was making tapes of his music. He has one of the most incredible voices and was known in the area for singing. And Hazel Dickens is the older woman who, Hazel and Alice were a singing duo, two women who kind of came up around the same time as the Carter family, and they had a pretty good career. Everybody else is actors who worked really hard to sound vaguely like they were singing mountain style. And Sheila K. Adams really kicked their butts when we were working. She hated Pat Carroll, who played Viney, because she didn't sound authentic, because Pat couldn't stop sounding Broadway. But, you know, it worked. It worked. She was pretty great.
And Taj Mahal, of course, is in the film.
And Taj Mahal blessed us for a day to come and, you know, and be a master and remind everybody really what happened to that music on the way down the mountain.
Yeah, can you comment on that?
I'll let you go.
What was the question?
Well, we were talking about referring to Taj Mahal playing the banjo and just the real origins of the banjo in American music, not, you know, coming from African musical traditions.
But I was also saying that I felt it was important to have him in the movie so that because that is really what happened, is black and white musicians would just meet in the middle of nowhere at a post office or whatever and play music together and then go their separate ways. But by the time that you know, ballads and that music came down the mountain, it had been completely combined with black music and was an American form that didn't exist without black music.
I mean, I think you summed it up, but yeah, you know, the story of America is the story of segregation, but, you know, most of our American music is the result of these cross-racial and cross-cultural collaborations in various ways. So yeah, you know, the banjo being an African instrument, then, you know, kind of taking shape and kind of forming the core of old-time music and bluegrass and so on and so forth. I mean, our American music is the result of various cultural mixing, and I think that's important. That was demonstrated, I think, awesomely in the movie.
Yeah, I'm watching the movie now. I haven't seen it in a long time. I'm sitting there going like, oh, could you stop teaching people stuff? I feel like it's just like, and I need them to know this, and I want them to know this, because this is amazing. You know, the whole thing about guitar. Well, I thought that was incredible. Guitar didn't exist in the United States till after the Spanish-American War. It was a Spanish instrument in Cuba, and when American soldiers went to fight in Cuba, they brought back guitars. I mean, who knew? Not me. You know.
Did your research?
I did, and then I put too much of it in the movie.
Oh.
And another thing, and oh, by the way, another thing.
That's how you get to be on Science on Screen.
I guess so.
We have another question.
That's the science part.
Do you know why the music died out in England and Scotland? And was it because it was isolated here that it thrived?
Yes, exactly. It was not isolated in the UK, and you know, communities started to move around in industrialization, and people left their communities to go somewhere else to earn a living. These folks were trapped. There was no place for them to go, and they were viewed as less than human when they came out of the mountains. So other than the men coming out of the mountains to fight wars, because of course they were enlisted to fight wars, they were really looked down upon, and but also how the hell would you get in and out of there? You know, I mean, I hope that came across, that it was really, really hard. It would take days to get a couple of miles up the mountains. There were no roads, there was nothing. So when somehow these communities of Scots-Irish people had found their way over the mountain, and that's where the inbreeding jokes, you know, come from, because there weren't that many of them, and they did intermarry, and they were stuck there.
That's still true.
Question back here?
Yeah, and it is still true today in some areas.
Great film once again. Quick question on the music. We seem to have, there is a great focus on what is the tradition of music, the things that are old and we value them. And so my question is, where is music going to in the coming year? So what will be the ethnomusicologist of the future study? Will it be the same music that we are studying?
That's on you.
Yeah. That's a heavy question. Of course, you know, we're in the digital age, we're in the virtual age. So I think that's what's been coloring or shaping ethnomusicology for at least the last 5 years, and will shape it in the future. You know, we're in a very hyper-mediated, hyper-documented society. Information is more accessible than ever before, and that's changing our concepts or notions of, you know, culture and community. I mean, a community can be comprised of people who don't even live in the same place, or don't even, you know, or have never met in person, you know. And so I think it's just, you know, the digital age, that's what's shaping ethnomusicology, and that's what's going to inform us going forward. How do we understand these larger concepts, and how do those larger concepts shape music making and music reception?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm sort of obsessed with trying to figure out how you work, Langston, when you're trying to record a tradition. Like, what kind of materials do you use? What kind of recorders? What kind of setting are you in? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, you know, I think it was kind of documented here in the film, except, you know, a little more updated. So we use digital recorders. We take a lot of photography, you know, using, you know, high-powered DSLR cameras, because of course we want to, you know, create pristine, you know, documentation of these cultures that are going to last across, you know, generations. So yeah, it's mostly digital recorders, film cameras, camcorders, and still photography. That's kind of the ethnomusicologist toolkit here.
And you're visiting
Right.
older people to try to get their stories and their songs or music or pieces before they pass?
Sometimes.
Or are you doing
You know,
younger artists too?
Both really. At least, you know, my job with the Arts Commission is mostly older people, because again, we're trying to preserve these traditions and keep them from, you know, dying out. But in terms of my personal work, my graduate work, I mean, it was all amongst younger people, you know, people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, I guess, and just documenting the way music works for them. So it just depends on who you are. I mean, I had a friend who, you know, his whole dissertation was digital based. So it was all based on these online communities. So he didn't know how old, you know, his informants or his subjects were. So it just depends.
Well, on that note, do you have places where you archive for the public the artists that you've been recording?
Yeah, in fact I do. And this is a plug for Arts Commission. You
Okay.
can go to www.tnfolklife.com, I believe. and just explore a page, learn about our apprenticeship program, learn about our other programs, and you'll see the kind of work that we're doing in Tennessee in both folk life and ethnomusicology.
Great, thank you. Would you give that again? Give it again?
Can you say that address again?
Yeah, it's www.tnfolklife.com or mighty.org.
It's kind of just specific, and I think a lot of things are asked anyway.
Okay.
When you're recording out in the field, doing field recordings, do you pretty much mostly stick with the closely mic'd recordings, or do you ever do it for the back or certain effects for some work better certain musics, or?
It just depends on if I'm if we're recording an individual, of course we want to be up close. But sometimes, I'll record concerts where I can't get up close and I can't get a direct plug in from the board, so I'm just out there. So it just depends on, what I can get, I guess, just have to adjust.
Well, Langston Wilkins, thank you very much. Maggie Greenwald, thank you so much.